Hello again and welcome back to my channel. This video is the third in my Premiere Pro course, and if you're not sure how to find your way around the Premiere Pro interface, then watch the first video. And if you want to learn how to start a new project and organize your content from scratch, then that's all in the second video. To keep up with new videos in the course as they are uploaded, then please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. So in this video we're going to be taking a look at the timeline, and that's the bit that's contained in this area towards the bottom right of the Premiere Pro screen, and it's outlined in blue because I've highlighted that panel group. It's in the timeline that you do all your editing, so mastering the timeline is the same thing as mastering editing in Premiere Pro. So first of all, what is the timeline? Well, the timeline shows your whole video from start to end, or a part of it depending on how far you are zoomed into the content. In my project here we can see the whole timeline, but I can use the plus key to zoom in on a part of it, and I can use the little scroll bar at the bottom to move forwards and backwards through it. We can use the backslash key to zoom back to show the entire timeline on the screen at one time. So in the timeline we have a number of tracks. So you can see that this is a track called V1 for the video 1 track. We also have video 2 and video 3 that I'm not using in this. I'm just simply using the video 1 track. So you can see the clips are all on the track end to end. You can see where they are start wise and the end of the clip. At the top of the timeline you can see the time code for the video, so you can see that this part is at almost 15 seconds, here we're at 30 seconds and so on, and you can see how your clips are arranged against that time code. There are other video tracks in my timeline. This one is used for some headings at the beginning, and we also then have a number of audio tracks. So the audio tracks are at the bottom half of the timeline, and we have the first audio track here, which is the audio connected with each of my video clips. They were recorded from my Osmo Pocket, and it recorded the sound as well as the video, and so that is contained below the video clips in the audio clips on this audio track. And then I have another audio track, which is a stereo soundtrack, which is the narration that I have put onto my video. And finally on the timeline you can see things like special effects and graphics that you have put onto it. And here I have a dip to black at the end of the track just to close off the video. So that gives you an idea of what is contained within the audio track. So in the timeline then there is a playhead, and when I played that little bit of video you can see that the playhead moves along, and you can use this to scrub through your timeline and see what you've got contained there at any point in time. The timeline is a drag and drop interface, so you can move clips around, you can change the order of them, you can move them onto a different track if you wish, and you can build your video using drag and drop with the mouse. But there are also a number of keyboard shortcuts that you can use which will greatly speed up your editing, and I want to take you through some of those keyboard shortcuts now just before we go any further with this. So first of all, I've mentioned a few of them. You can use plus to zoom in, and that can be incredibly useful. So for example, that you can see the audio and you can look for the beats in the music if that's what you have in your audio track, and you can synchronize your tracks to the beats in the music if you want to do that. And you can use the minus key to zoom back out again. You can also use the backslash key to zoom to the entire timeline. You can see that some of these tracks are highlighted in this particular column, the column that shows the track name. And so V1 is highlighted, and I can click on V2 to highlight that. That means that it's a targeted track. If I, for example, use the home key to go to the beginning of the timeline, I can press the down arrow to go to the beginning and the end of clips that are targeted. So if I press it down, it goes to the beginning of the first clip that is targeted on my timeline, and if I press down again, it's going to the end of that clip, which is also the beginning of the next clip. And so I can step through all the clips just simply using the up and down arrow keys. Now you'll notice that it didn't stop at the end of my title that is here, and that's because the title is not on a targeted track. But if I click on the V2 track name, that makes it a targeted track. If I now press the down arrow, you'll see that it goes to the beginning of the first clip on a targeted track. If I press it again, it goes to the end of that title, which is now also on a targeted track. So that is a really useful way for you just to step up and down through your timeline. You can also change the height of the individual tracks, which could be useful, particularly, for example, on the video tracks, if you want to see the thumbnails of what's contained within that clip. If you have the track being too small, you don't see the thumbnails, but when you reach a certain size, Premiere will show you the thumbnails, and that can be very handy for you to find a clip that you want. And the same is true of the audio clips. If the audio clips are too small, you don't really see much of the detail of the waveform that is there, and so it's hard to find the gaps and the places on the soundtrack that you want. So you can simply drag the boundaries of the individual tracks up and down as you need to. If you need more clips, you can achieve that by just simply right-clicking and adding tracks. Add a track or add several tracks. And if you have tracks that you don't need anymore, you can delete them with a right click. Let's now just have a look at some of the icons that are on the left of the individual tracks. The first icon that you see here is a little lock. That's the track lock toggle. So if you click on that, you'll see that it turns blue to highlight it, and that track now cannot be edited. You can't move things around on that track or do anything with it. You might want to use that, for example, with your music soundtrack that you've put into a video, because when you move all the other clips around, you don't want anything to change on the music track. So I would recommend locking the music track once you have it in place on your video. Locking and unlocking tracks using the track lock toggle is a useful thing for you to do. Then there is the sync lock toggle. Initially, all of the tracks are locked together, and so if, for example, you delete something out of a track, it will also take the same amount of space or time out of the other tracks that are synced with that track. So if you don't want a track to be affected by deletions or insertions like that, you can switch off sync lock and it will not be synced with the other tracks. So I would again turn that off for music and on for graphics, so that your graphics move with the clips that they are associated with. Then you can just switch off the visibility of a track. So if we go, for example, here to the end of my titles and I switch off the visibility of that, you see that it just disappears. Or if I'm on this track, you'll see that it just simply switches off whatever that clip happens to be. So if you want to turn off a track and maybe eliminate all your titles while you're concentrating on the clips themselves, then you can do that by just clicking on the visibility icon. And the same goes for the audio tracks. You can mute a track if, in this case, for example, if you don't want the audio that was recorded with these clips as they were captured, then you can just simply switch that off and listen only to the narration, or you could do the other way around. Alternatively, for the sound tracks, for the audio tracks, you can solo those tracks, which means that is the only audio that you'll hear, and it will switch off all of the other audio, which might be useful, for example, to synchronizing to the beat in music if you don't want other things to disturb that. So let's look now at how to get content onto the timeline to get started with our editing. So I prefer to do this in the assembly panel, and I will create a new sequence. In this case, I'll just use Control N to create a new sequence. I'll call it demo, and I'm happy with the 1080p sequence. So we can start now to have a look at the content that we have available, and the way I would do this is to take each clip that is a contender for my timeline. If you double click on that, it will show up in the source monitor. In this case, I already have marked some in and out points, but if you haven't already marked your in and out points, you can scrub through the content, find where you want to start that. I would typically just hit I for the in point, although you can use these buttons in order to do that, and then play through to where you want that clip to finish, and say we want it to finish here. I can type O for the out point. Now I have a couple of options for putting this onto the timeline. You could drag the clip from here and put it onto the timeline, and it will respect those in and out points. Or you could use one of these two buttons depending on how you want to do this. So if you want to insert it onto the timeline, you click on this one, or you simply type the comma key in order to do that. If you want to overwrite whatever's at that point in the timeline, you can use this button, or you can simply press the full stop and it will overwrite whatever's on the timeline at that point. At the beginning of the sequence where we haven't got anything onto the timeline, it doesn't matter. So I'll just press the comma key and you can see that that clip is now on the timeline. Going back to the timeline, if I press the plus key, you can see a little bit more of this, and if I expand the height of that, you can see that it now shows the thumbnail for that particular clip. So we can continue on having a look at our other content and simply drop it onto the timeline as we wish. If we wanted to put something into the timeline, as I say before, we have the option to either insert it or press the comma, in which case you'll see that it has cut the clip that was at the playhead at that point in time, and it has pushed everything that is further down the timeline away from that clip and made room and inserted the clip into that particular space. So there you have it. If I type Control Z, I can undo that. If we preferred to overwrite that, it wouldn't push everything down the timeline. It would simply put whatever we wanted into the timeline at that point in time. So I would do that simply by hitting full stop to overwrite it, or clicking on that and it's overwritten whatever was there before. So again, I'll just press Control Z to go back to the way that we were. And you remember that we can press the backslash key at any time in order to expand the timeline to cover just the content that is in the sequence. So that's how we would put the content onto the timeline. If you want to put content onto another track on the timeline, then you should target a different track. In this case, if we pick up another clip and we put it in, you'll see that with the insert, it will go on to another track, but it will make room for it by pushing the other tracks along. That's something that we generally wouldn't want to do if we're using another track. So in this case, we would use the overwrite button and it would go on to that other track and not make any changes to what was there. Except in this case, we are overwriting the audio track for these particular clips. So perhaps what we should have done was targeted the second audio track in order to do this. So let me just go back. So we're back the way we were now. If I select this clip and I click on overwrite, you'll see that it puts the video and the audio onto separate tracks, and we can move things around as we need them. So that shows you how you can get tracks onto your timeline. Let's just look for a little bit at how you might do some editing of those clips, and we'll look both at some essential keyboard shortcuts, and we'll also look at some of the buttons and tools that you can use in order to edit your clips. So first of all, if you wanted to split this clip into two, you can type Control K, or you can use the razor blade, cut the clip at that point in time by type Control Z. I could have done this by just simply typing Control K, which is the shortcut for the razor blade to cut the clip into two. That allows us the opportunity to move the remaining part of the clip out of the way or do whatever we want to do with it. So I've just put it back the way that it is at the moment. If you were at a place on the timeline where there were several tracks that were relevant and you type Control K, it just cuts the highlighted clips. But I'm just pressing Control Z to go back to where we were. If you hold down Shift when you press Control K, it will cut the entire timeline, which allows you potentially to insert something there or to move everything that there is on your timeline. That of course wouldn't cut any tracks that were locked with the toggle lock. So that shows how you can cut your clips up as you need them to be. So let's suppose you want to get rid of some of these clips. Well, let's look at this first clip. If I press the delete key, it just simply disappears off the timeline. I'll type Control Z to bring it back. However, if I hold down the Shift key when I press delete, you will see that all the tracks move back. The clip is removed and the space is also removed and filled in with the following clips to leave no space on the timeline. And you'll see that all of the tracks have moved. That is all of the tracks that were sync locked to the track that we're working on. That's called ripple delete, where the effect of that delete ripples through all the following tracks and clips that are on your timeline. Let's have a look at some of the other options that you have, as well as the selection tool where you can move an individual clip whichever way you want to move it. There is also the track select forward tool. If you click on this, you'll see that it's highlighting everything that's further down the timeline, and when I move it, everything moves with it. That's a good option if you're trying to create some space. You can do a cut for all tracks and then you can use the forward selection tool in order to move them all and create some space for yourself. This tool can be a little bit confusing, but let's go through it fairly simply. So this is the ripple edit tool, and this means that changes that you make to the length of a clip will ripple forwards through the timeline. If, for example, I decided to make this clip a little bit shorter, say about half the size that it previously was, you can see that that effect ripples down the timeline to any synchronized tracks that there happen to be. I'll undo that. So if we hold down the mouse button, you'll see that there are some options here, and this one is the rolling edit tool, which allows you to move the boundary between two clips. So if I move this one back the way, it will make the clip following it longer by the same amount in order not to move the following clips. So you can just move the boundary between two clips, make the first one longer or shorter and the second one the opposite to compensate exactly for that. So you just move your boundary without affecting too much on your timeline. And then finally there is the Rit Stretch Tool. This is an interesting one because it doesn't change the start or end points of your clip. It changes the speed of the clip in order to keep the same start and end content on the clip, but to make the time duration of it on the timeline slightly longer or shorter depending on what you do. And it doesn't do a ripple edit. You would just have to simply take the clip and then move it back up if you've moved the start of it using that particular tool. So that shows the first number of tools that are here. I'm going to cover some of these other tools in more detail later because they're really not particularly basic to the timeline, and that would be things like the pen tool for drawing masks and the text tool for adding graphics onto your timeline. But for now, I just want to show you a couple of other really quick keyboard shortcuts that are essential for an editor. So I press the backspace key and we go back and show the full timeline. And here I'm going to go to this point in the clip, and supposing that I wanted to eliminate everything before that, I can simply use the letter Q and it will do a ripple delete, eliminate everything that was before the playhead in that clip and move the entire project up. So that's really handy to do. I'll press Ctrl Z to get it back. And the same can be done in the opposite direction. If I didn't want any more of that clip to be on the timeline, I can use W in order to eliminate everything that is beyond that. And it will also affect the tracks that are above and below that if they have the sync lock set. If they're not synced, then it won't. They'll stay where they were, but that is pretty handy. Certainly you would want to move any graphics along with them, so you would keep graphics tracks sync locked and you would keep music tracks not sync locked, or lock the entire track. So Q and W to delete back to the beginning of a clip from the playhead, or delete to the end of the clip from the playhead, and do it in a ripple fashion so that there are no gaps left in your timeline. So those are some of the quick ways of doing an edit on the timeline. I think that's probably enough for an introduction to the timeline. We'll look at more sophisticated ways of editing and things that you can do. We'll be looking at the effects, the Lumetri color panel, how to work with audio, how to work with graphics in later videos in the series. So thank you very much for sticking with this. If you want to hear more, then please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, and you'll see the videos as they come up. So if you have enjoyed this video and benefited from it, then please subscribe to my channel. Hit the bell and you'll be notified of the new videos as they're uploaded. I'm going to post a new video each week covering Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, Photoshop and Lightroom. So if you're interested in learning about these projects, then please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell and get a new video every week.